Okay. Good evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I'm your host, Nelson E. Brown, and I want to thank you all for joining in for another broadcast. This is going to be another amazing show this evening. Tonight, we have Mr. Zeke Cohen, Baltimore City Councilman Zeke Cohen, who is going to be joining us for the second half of the show. I apologize for not making it here last week. I had some technical difficulties that I was dealing with on my end, but I was able to get those fixed last week in the beginning of this week. So now I'm back in action and I'm here with you all for another amazing show. Now, before we dive into tonight's subject, I want to talk a little bit about Black History Month, because as you all know, we are like a week into Black History Month. And for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking about, for the first half of the show, I want to be talking about two historical Black figures, one man and one woman. So I'm going to give a trivia in the beginning of the broadcast, and I will reveal the answer at the end of the show. So you all are free to participate. This is just for fun. You don't win any money or any prizes or anything, but it's just celebrating Black History Month. That's something that we do every year on the Beauty in Us Radio, right here on Awesome Guy Radio. So this is the second time in a row that we've had an opportunity to do this. So again, we're going to be talking about Black History Month for the first portion of the show within the first few weeks until we end Black History Month at the end of this month. So again, I wanted to thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, everyone who's tuning in. I want to thank you all. So again, we're going to have Baltimore City Councilman Zeke Cohen on with us. He represents District 1 in the Baltimore City Council. So he's going to be talking a lot about what he does in the council in terms of the work that he does representing District 1. So he's going to educate us about what the neighborhoods are and how he serves on the Baltimore City Council and the committees that he's part of and so forth. So he'll have the privilege of joining us later on in the show to talk about that. But without further ado, I want to talk about two historical figures, and I want to give you all information about two historical figures at the beginning of this show so that you guys can have some time to do your research and think about it. So I have two historical figures, Black figures, one man and one woman, that I would like to talk to you all about and give you some clues about, so that the names will be revealed by the end of the broadcast, so all of the pieces can come together. So one historical figure, he was an American writer of children's books, and he was best known for producing and writing adult literature. He was born in Martinsburg, West Virginia, but he was also raised in Harlem. A tough childhood led him to writing, and his school teachers always encouraged him in this habit as a way to express himself. He wrote more than 100 books, including picture books and nonfiction. This gentleman, he won the Coretta Scott King Award for African American authors 5 times, and his 1988 novel, Fallen Angels, is one of the books most frequently challenged in the United States of America because of its adult language and its realistic depiction of the Vietnam War. And this gentleman, he was also the third U.S. National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, and he served in 2012 and 2013, and he also sat on the board of advisors of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So again, that's one historical figure that I will be revealing the name of at the end of the broadcast this evening. But I want to give you guys time to think about him. But in the meantime, I'm also going to give you the historical figure, the Black figure, who's a woman. So you all have an opportunity to think about two names and to do your research, because I know people are going to look it up. Do your research. So two African American historical figures, one man and one woman, who are inspirational and who made an impact on communities around the world and for generations. So this other lady, she was an American lawyer, educator, and politician who was a leader in the civil rights movement. She was registered as a Democrat, and she was the first African American elected to the Texas Senate after the Reconstruction era, and the first Southern African American woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. She is now known for her eloquent opening statement at the House Judiciary Committee hearings during the impeachment process against former President Richard Nixon. And in 1976, she became the first African American and the first woman to ever deliver a keynote address at the Democratic National Convention. She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, among other numerous honors, and she was the first African American woman to be buried in the Texas State Cemetery. She's also known for her work as the chair of the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform, which recommended reducing legal immigration by approximately 1/3. So again, these are two historical figures that, yes, thank you, Ms. Breezy, for tuning in. Again, I want to thank you all for tuning into tonight's show. I'm very happy to have you all. And Ms. Breezy, she's been a part of AGR for a while. She supports every single broadcast. And I want to just give her a shout out and thank her for tuning in each and every week whenever she can. I support everybody's show and everybody's work in terms of what they're doing, and I appreciate the support in return. So yes, thank you very much. So those are the two historical figures that I gave you all information about for the beginning of the show, but I want you guys to think about it and, again, do your research. I know people are going to look this up. So I'm just waiting for somebody to look this up and just tell me. Like I said, you don't win any prizes or anything, but it's a little trivia to celebrate Black History Month. But in the meantime, as I stated before, we're going to talk about many of the subjects that Baltimore City Councilman Zeke Cohen of District 1 is going to be discussing later on in the show. We're going to talk about two things that go hand in hand when we talk about public service. We are going to be talking about youth empowerment, and we are also going to be able to talk about public safety. So youth empowerment and public safety. So those are the subjects we are going to speak about this evening. And those are the subjects that are geared towards our conversation that we're going to have with Councilman Cohen during the second half of the show. So we're going to talk about public safety and youth empowerment. So I want to give you all details about what that is before we invite him on to talk about that. So youth empowerment. So sources say that youth empowerment is a process where children and young people are encouraged to take charge of their lives. So they do this by addressing their situation, and then they take action in order to improve their access to resources and transform their consciousness through their beliefs, values, and attitudes. And youth empowerment aims to improve the quality of life. So youth empowerment is achieved through participation in youth empowerment programs, but scholars argue that children's rights implementation should go beyond learning about formal rights and procedures to give birth to concrete experiences of rights. And there are so many models that youth empowerment programs use that help youth achieve empowerment. So a variety of empowerment initiatives are underway around the world. And even when we talk about it locally, we can think about the work that's done throughout the city of Baltimore and throughout the state of Maryland. So when we think about youth empowerment programs and when we think about the ways we can empower our youth and encourage them to come together in order to make a difference and to be that change that they want to see, we have to think about all of the activists and all of the community organizers who serve and live in our communities. So that's from a local standpoint, but when we think about this from a holistic approach, these are some of the things to keep in mind. So according to sources, it says that these programs can be through nonprofit organizations, like I stated, government organizations, schools, or private organizations. So empowerment programs, including youth empowerment, originate and gain momentum. They become viable and they become institutionalized. So youth empowerment is often addressed as a gateway to intergenerational equity, civic engagement, and democracy building. And activities may focus on youth-led media, youth rights, youth councils, youth activism, youth involvement in community decision-making, and other methods. So another activist, a young person who's active in her community is, I'm trying to see if I can pronounce her name correctly. Let's see. Okay, here she is. Right. So Malala Yousafzai is an activist for female education and the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner. So I'm not sure if you all remember this young lady, but Malala, she is a Pakistani activist for female education and one of the youngest, well, actually the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner. She's known as being the second Pakistani to ever receive the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's also known for human rights advocacy, especially the education of women and children in her native country, and which had banned girls from attending school. And her advocacy has grown into an international movement. And according to the former prime minister, the Pakistani prime minister in her home country, she has become the country's most prominent citizen. So I'm not sure if you all remember, but just to recap everything, she was actually Malala was actually several years ago. I remember my teacher from middle school. She told us a lot about the work that she did in order to support girls and in order to be that role model for women who were pursuing education in her home country, and how she was retaliated against, for that on several occasions, and how she was penalized in so many different ways. And I just want to, again, when we talk about youth empowerment, we want to think about this from a holistic standpoint, and just to think about the fact that, Malala, her work that she does in her home country, and the work that she does in order to support women around the world who are trying to better themselves through education and taking advantage of opportunities. We have to think about how impactful that is. And I think that when I first heard about her back in middle school, that kind of led me to thinking about youth empowerment and the programs and initiatives that people can take in order to make sure that our young people are getting the support and encouragement they need, as well as the guidance and the resources in order to succeed at whatever they want to succeed at, academically and scholastically, and even throughout the course of their lives. So when we talk about youth empowerment, we can also think about again, our children being change agents. So youth empowerment, according to sources, it says that it occurs in homes, at schools, through youth organizations, government policy making, and community organizing campaigns. And major structural activities where youth empowerment happens throughout society could include communities' decision making, organizational planning, and education reform. Educational activities that cite youth empowerment as an aim includes student-centered learning, popular education, and service learning. And free schools and youth-led media organizations often state their intention to empower youth, as well as youth voice, community youth development, and youth leadership programs. So youth empowerment is studied by a variety of scholars, and research shows that the scholars, their research is highlighted by advocacy from noble activists and then other prominent initiatives in the United States. One of which is the Youth Empowerment Initiative sponsored by the Obama Foundation Youth Group. So these are the types of examples that we can see in the United States. So again, when we think about youth empowerment, we can think about the benefits of empowerment. So according to some of these sources, it says that when youth participate in established empowerment programs, they see a variety of benefits, and the practices of youth involvement and empowerment become embedded within the organizational culture and the community culture. And adults and organizations also benefit from empowerment programs, and they both become more communicable and responsive to youth in the community, which leads to program improvements as well as increased participation from youth. So again, these are some of the things that we can think about when we talk about youth empowerment and when we talk about the benefits. But we can also look at the critiques of youth empowerment, because again, we have to look at the advantages and disadvantages, both ends of the spectrum. We have to think about it. So one major critique of youth empowerment is that most programs take a risk-focused approach, and there has been a major emphasis on what is going on wrong for youth in their lives rather than what's going right. So again, when we think about youth empowerment programs, a lot of critics focus mainly on the negative things that are happening amongst the young people within every community around the world, but instead they should be focused more on the positive things that are going on, the positive things that young people are involved with. So when we talk to Councilman Cohen for the second half of the show, we can talk about youth empowerment and what that looks like. and the work that he does as a member of the Education, Workforce, and Youth Committee in the City Council. It also states that this portrays young people as a problem that need to be fixed and displays the process of development as a process of overcoming risks. This may deter youth from joining youth development groups, and the risk-based model can obscure the fact that adolescence is a time when young people master skills and concepts. So again, a lot of young people are still trying to figure out who they are. They're growing up and they're trying to figure out where their place is in the world. So a lot of youth empowerment programs are supposed to create unity amongst the community. So when we think about that, we have to remember that, each and every young person is gifted and talented in something, but it's our job as adults and as members of the community to bring them together and to help them discover what their talents are and let them, nurture their talents, enrich themselves, and work with their fellow classmates. Every boy and girl, every young lady, every young man has an opportunity to be and do something great. But it's our job as adults, as community leaders, as community activists, and as people who are acting as mentors, coaches, teachers, people who are supposed to be leaders. It's our jobs to help them cultivate their passions and to help them with the process of figuring out who they are and where their place is in the world, because a lot of young people need guidance and a lot of them need direction. And that's something that is not always guaranteed to them because of what they may have gone through or what kind of circumstance they may be in their home life. But nevertheless, it can kind of lead into our conversation about public safety. So when we talk about public safety, we're also going to talk about public safety during the second half of the show. And we're going to talk about the work that Councilman Cohen does on that committee as well. So when we talk about public safety, we have to think about the welfare and protection of the general public. But when we talk about public safety, it's usually expressed as a governmental responsibility. And most states do have departments that focus on public safety, but the primary goal of the department is prevention and protection of the public from dangers affecting safety. So crime and disasters are just two of many examples, but in many cases, the public safety department will be comprised of individuals, so people who are from other organizations. So that could be emergency medical services, people who work in that area, people who are police officers, firefighters, and so forth. But we also have to think about public safety in other ways, because public safety, again, it goes hand in hand with what we are talking about right now. It goes hand in hand in terms of what the issues are in our community. So oftentimes when we think about issues such as crime, we have to think about education. So when we think about the roots, the problems and the basic roots of all of the problems that pertain to crime, or when public welfare is in jeopardy, we have to think about education because it goes hand in hand. And when we think about public safety, we have to think about those 911 calls, those 24-hour communications from firefighters and police officers, the roundabout services that are needed in order to make sure that each and every person throughout our community is safe. Each and every community preserves public safety. Again, each and every community has a right to know what's going on. Everybody deserves to feel safe in their community. All of the people, who want to invest into public safety, people who want to pursue careers in public safety have to keep in mind that, in order to do that, we have to think about the needs of our community. And when we think about the impact that it has on youth and young adults, we have to think about, again, the youth empowerment programs, some of the things that I described, the ways in which I described youth empowerment and how that has an impact on what we do and how we nurture our young people and support them in every way. So some public safety issues there are a wide variety of them, but it could include, um, you know, inappropriate social behavior, inebriation, delinquency, juvenile delinquency, harassment, burglary, trespassing, narcotic use, and so many other crimes. Something that's detrimental to the public. So again, people look at it as a governmental responsibility, but we have to look at it as a community. We have to look at it as being, an issue that all of us can fix as a community. I would not personally consider it as a governmental responsibility when we think about public safety and when we think about ways to empower the youth. We are all filled with ideas. Each and every person can be creative, and each and every person can use their gifts and talents in order to help others. Everyone's in the position to use their gifts and talents in order to make a difference. So when we think about public safety, we can also think about ways that we can make a difference, not just in terms of the welfare of the people from an ideological standpoint, but we can often think about the welfare of the people from a holistic standpoint. But crime all stems from education. So public safety and youth empowerment go hand in hand, because when the community is safe and when the community feels protected, so do the young people and so do other people throughout the community. So again, we're talking about and thank you all for tuning in. Just in case you're tuning in for the first time, I'm Nelson E. Brown, and this is the Beauty in Us Radio. We'll be speaking to Baltimore City Councilman Zeke Cohen of District 1 in about 10 minutes or so. But if you're just joining me, we're talking about public safety and youth empowerment. So when we think about this, we have to think about it from a holistic approach. We have to take a holistic approach stance on this, because again, we I'll often think about it as a governmental responsibility. So in other words, we rely on our elected officials and people who we vote for in order to fix the problems that exist throughout our communities. But it's our job as members of our communities to pitch in and help remedy these problems. So when we think about people throughout our communities, we have to think about our community leaders. So our pastors, our teachers, our school administrators, our adults, all of the people who live and work in the communities. We can definitely consider all of them to be leaders, and we can definitely rely on them to make a difference and to be that change. So Ms. Breezy says that you're right. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. That's exactly right. So again, just like Ms. Breezy, she said, you're right. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. So, and that's precisely my point. Everybody's in the position to pitch in and use their gifts and talents in order to help others. Now, from a spiritual standpoint, God didn't bless everyone with every single gift in the world, but God has blessed all of us with a specific talent or specific talents and gifts. So we can all serve our community in one area or another. So when we talk about public safety and when we talk about youth empowerment, they go hand in hand. So when your community feels safe, the young people feel empowered. When we think about, again, examples such as crime, it all starts with education, opportunities, workforce development, and things of that nature. So even when we think about public safety in the United States, we often think about the state or local government agencies that often have a broad range of responsibilities to the public. So again, firefighters or fire services, which provide fire prevention and suppression, hazmat services. So again, these are examples of departments that work in public safety. rescue services, which provide rescue services, hazmat services, which provide hazardous materials responses, emergency medical services, medical care, transportation. Those are the types of services, policing, law enforcement, community policing and outreach, Department of Motor Vehicles, the administration of driver's license plates, and ID cards, and the Department of Transportation, which includes vehicle registration, tags, and license plates. So again, these are all departments that operate in the field of public safety. So in any way you can watch out for the welfare of people throughout your community. That's how you serve. That's the true meaning of public safety. But again, when we think about issues related to crime, it all stems from education. So even we often hear in the news, especially locally, about the violence. When we think about the violence, when we think about all of the chaos that takes place in throughout the school systems and throughout our communities, we have to think about this in terms of how each and every community is systematically affected by these harmful practices over and over again, being bypassed. All of the communities that are bypassed and overlooked, all of the communities that consistently experience so much trauma and who aren't being afforded the opportunities that should be available to them from every angle. It's often it can often leave us feeling frustrated about where we live, to the point where some people can't really see past where they are. But again, when we think about public safety and when we think about youth empowerment, we have to see the best in things. We have to think about solutions to all of the problems that exist. We have to think about ways to remedy each and every situation that we may find ourselves in. So again, like I spoke about before, youth empowerment is a process where children and young people are encouraged to take charge of their lives. But again, when we think about examples of youth empowerment, we can often think about all of the programs that exist across the globe that focus on a wide variety of things and not as a comprehensive list. But youth empowerment programs that aren't as successful have not been carefully documented or published in case studies recently. But when we think about, again, government involvement in youth empowerment programs, we think about some of the things I spoke of before, which are civic engagement, democracy building, and intergenerational equity. So when we think about intergenerational equity, economically, psychologically, and sociologically, we have to think about the concepts and ideas of fairness or justice between generations. When we think about civic engagement within youth empowerment, we have to think about any group or any person that addresses issues of public concern, which can, again, relate to public safety. And when we think about democracy building or democracy promotion, democracy assistance, democracy support, we have to think about the strands of foreign policies that are adopted by governments and international organizations that seek to support the spread of democracy from an ideological standpoint around the world. But again, we have to think about, in this case, how it includes the beliefs that countries with a certain ideological system of governance are less likely to experience conflicts. So again, those are examples that I use in order to try to convey to you guys how important it is to engage in these types of activities on a day-to-day basis throughout your community. Everyone has an opportunity to make a difference, and I continue to say that over and over again. Everyone may not have a gift that some of their brothers and sisters may have, but we are all in a position to make a difference. So whether you sing, whether you're an artist, whether you are a great public speaker, if you know how to write books, if you know how to mentor, if you know how to serve, if you know how to minister. I mean, there's so many spiritual gifts from a spiritual standpoint. There are so many gifts that God has blessed us with in order to make a difference. But it's up to us to figure out what they are so that we can use them to the best of our abilities. So when we think about public safety, we think about the general welfare of our brothers and sisters. When we think about youth empowerment, we think about ways we can help young people prosper and take charge of their lives. So there are a lot of local, state, regional, national, and international government agencies and nonprofit community-based organizations that have programs that are centered around youth empowerment. And youth-led media programs consist of any effort that's created, planned, implemented, and reflected upon by young people, whether it's on TV, whether it's on websites, whether it's in newspapers, and so forth. Those are the things that we can expect to see when we think about youth empowerment programs, and when we do think about the ways that we can make, see our young people at their best and uplift them and encourage them and help and assist them in pursuing what they want to pursue. So on that note, I am pleased to welcome Baltimore City Councilman Zeke Cohen to my broadcast. Councilman Cohen, thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to be a part of my broadcast. You are the second person from the Baltimore City Council to appear on the Beauty and Us radio right here on Awesome God Radio. The retired City Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark was my first guest in the very beginning of my broadcast when I started back in 2020, in September of 2020. So I was speaking to the audience about public safety and youth empowerment. So those were the topics that I brought to the table for the beginning of the show. And it's, from my understanding, those are the two committees that you are a part of on the City Council. So could you tell us a little bit about your work? I know some people are not as familiar with District 1 as many of the other districts. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So first off, it is really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. Apologies, I'm a few minutes late. I was downloading Google Chrome, which I didn't realize I needed for your StreamYard platform, but really good to be with you. So my district, District 1, encompasses a large, snaky swath of Southeast Baltimore. So it is everything. I actually see the little hashtags of my neighborhoods running across the screen. It is everything from Harbor East, Harbor Point, Little Italy, Fells Point, Canton, Patterson Park, Brewers Hill, Highlandtown, Greektown, Bayview, Broning Highway, Medford, O'Donnell Heights, Graceland Park, St. Helena. So it's like everything from wealth toward the water to poverty in O'Donnell Heights. It is a huge international community. Historically, it was folks from Poland and Fells Point, certainly Italian in Little Italy, Greek in Greektown. Jewish folks kind of moved up through East Baltimore and the Northwest through Park Heights. But in the last 15 or so years, a lot of folks from Central America, so people from El Salvador, Guatemala, Peru, some folks from Mexico. And what I like to say about my district is that it is a microcosm of America. It is every community. It's white, it's black, it's Hispanic, it's Asian, and it is really beautiful. It is a great mix of people. It's got businesses, it's got great restaurants. As you can tell, I absolutely love it. In terms of my work, so let's see. So a lot of the work that I do is sort of at the intersection of trying to rebuild democracy at a local level and education and youth, and supporting our young people. So the first bill that I passed when I was a freshman city council member was the Transparency in Lobbying Act. And that was legislation that forced lobbyists to disclose who it was that they were going to lobby, for the very obvious reason that we, I believe, as citizens in a democracy, deserve to know who is getting paid to advocate to elected officials. And so we passed that law, created a registry. You can go online right now. Lobbyists have to fill out a report every time they come and advocate to us. And that is everyone from developer lobbyists to environmental folks. We believe in transparency. We passed a bill, the gender inclusive single stall restroom bill, which made it so that every restroom in the city of Baltimore, if it is a single stall, it has to be gender inclusive. We heard from our trans and non-binary communities that bathrooms were a place of violence. And so we wanted to make sure that folks felt safe. And we followed New York and a bunch of other cities that had already done this. And so we were proud to pass that bill. During the pandemic, we were able to move $3 million to procure Chromebooks and internet access for kids. We know that we face a extremely profound digital divide in the city of Baltimore. About 40% of our families in 2018 did not have home wireline internet access. And, back then, that's a huge problem. But in a pandemic where everything is online, that becomes an absolute crisis. And so we quickly moved $3 million from our children and youth fund into our school system to be able to get kids connected with the internet, to be able to get kids Chromebooks. And we really went after Comcast, who is our primary internet service provider in the city of Baltimore, and really pushed on them to be a better partner to our kids. The legislation that I'm most proud of was a law that we passed in 2020 called the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act. It made Baltimore the first city in America, and this gets to your question around sort of the connection between youth empowerment and public safety. It made our city the first in the country to comprehensively legislate trauma-informed care. We know that so many young people and frankly older people in Baltimore have experienced 4, 5, 6, 7 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. We have young folks, and I used to be a teacher, so I know this, that experience day-to-day violence, that are living on our streets and experiencing homelessness. We have young people that have been in and out of the DJS, the Department of Juvenile Services. Our kids go through a lot. And so after a school shooting in 2019, some young people came to City Hall and called on us as local government to legislate, to come up with a law related to trauma. We spent a year doing a big listening tour in libraries and laundromats and rec centers and classrooms. We worked in deep partnership with those 3 students. And in the end, we passed a bill that, like I said, makes our city the first in the United States to have legislated trauma-informed care into our governance. And happy to share more about that later on, but that's some of the work that I've been able to do.
Yes, and that's awesome that you've been able to do that within the past few years, in terms of, because I know how difficult it is in order to get this across to a lot of people who may not understand the full aspects of like how impactful these bills can be once they are made into law. Because I'm a sociology student at UMBC, and I have some of my classmates that are trying to pursue a career in public service and in public policy, and a lot of them talk about how difficult it is in order for people to understand and be on the same page with a lot of these issues. And in terms of talking about trauma-based care and providing that, I think that a lot of times we've spoken about, like my classmates and I, and even within because of all of the sociology classes that we take, a lot of them, there are different dimensions that we go into. So we could think about the social dimensions of health and all of its aspects. Sometimes I've taken a course, a marriage and family course, family dynamics. I've also taken a course, the sociology of law, the sociology of education. So I know that, again, a lot of what you do in terms of when we talk about public safety and when we talk about youth empowerment, it can definitely dive into so many different dimensions. And sometimes it can be difficult for people to understand that from the outside. So a lot of people don't really understand what really goes on with that. So even when we talk about trauma-based care, I've had conversations with several of my guests on the show about how the pandemic has impacted the mental health, and how that can be very traumatic for people, especially throughout the pandemic. So, because when you think about trauma-based care, what does that exactly look like in terms of people not even realizing how traumatized they are, when things first happen? So, people who may, like you said, they may experience homelessness, food insecurity. They may have experienced, they may have witnessed a shooting or a murder. So these are different examples of traumatic events that can happen. So what does that look like? Because some people don't even really understand. Some people can sometimes be incapable of understanding how traumatic they really are in certain situations. So what does that exactly look like in terms of providing care?
Definitely. So, like, first off, I think you hit the nail on the head in saying that, one of the lagging indicators in a pandemic is a deep mental health crisis. You see this in pretty much every pandemic that we go through, which is, at first, everybody's extremely concerned, for good reason, about our physical health. And in the case of COVID-19, we talked a lot about social distancing and various forms of mitigation and just trying to keep people safe from hospitalization or dying from the virus. And, as we've lost hundreds of thousands of people to this incredibly deadly disease in this country. But what we then see is a major mental health crisis. And what that looks like is really different for everybody. I will say, in my own life during the pandemic, there have been moments where I felt depressed and really down. Michelle Obama talks about a dull depression that we're all collectively experiencing. And I think I would be hard pressed to find any of us that over the last 2 years haven't felt just really, 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 really down. And I think that can manifest itself in all kinds of different ways. But the other thing that we see in a place like Baltimore is we already have, and you sort of mentioned this, some really deep health disparities, and just life outcome disparities, right? So where I taught in Sandtown, Winchester, kids that grow up there will, on average, live 20 years less than kids that grow up in Roland Park, which is less than 3 miles away, right? Like, that is a disturbing, that's really disturbing. And we can look at, historically, Baltimore was the first city in the country to enact residential housing segregation legislatively in 1910. My forefathers on the city council passed a law that cut our city up between white, Black, Jewish neighborhoods. We were pioneers, again, in redlining, making sure that Black people couldn't buy in certain neighborhoods, block busting, contract lending, subprime lending. I mean, every scheme known to man to segregate and then expropriate wealth from Black, brown, indigenous, and at times Jewish communities. We've done that here. And so you see some really deep disparities, often based around race and class and so on. And so, one thing that we know the pandemic did is just exacerbate some of those health disparities, right? Like, if you were struggling to begin with, maybe during this pandemic, you lost your job. maybe you weren't able to pay rent, and you might have, there were these eviction moratoria where the governor declared a state of emergency, and so people may not have gotten thrown out of their homes, but those moratoria are over. The state of crisis, the legislation that the governor had passed is over, and so people are now being evicted at a pretty rapid clip within our city. We see in every city in America right now, violence is up and up and up and up, right? New York, it's up like 60% over 2 years ago. Philadelphia, Newark, Detroit, across the board, you see a spike in violent crime. Baltimore is no exception. We actually stayed steady for the last year and a half plus. And then in the last couple of months, we've been off the charts. And we're already one of the most violent cities in America. And so every incident of violence, every eviction, every time a young person is separated from their parents, that creates trauma. And what that does is it stilts someone's ability to form healthy, safe relationships. It literally impacts the prefrontal cortex of your brain. It can change your brain chemistry. It makes it harder for young people or any of us to concentrate and focus. It makes us more anxious, more likely to abuse substances, and it even causes us to be more likely to become either a perpetrator or a victim of violence. And so when we talk about trauma-informed care, the idea is that we recognize the impact of trauma on individuals and on communities, and then we begin to treat it both through prevention and effective response and mitigation, just like any other disease that you could think of. So in Baltimore, what that's looked like is, and this was what our legislation did, 3 things. One is we train every city agency in all of the principles of trauma-informed care, right? So we start with understanding the brain science. We talk about what physiologically it does to you. We talk about what are the symptoms? How does it manifest itself? It could be, anger and frustration and kids popping off, or it could be young people that are just withdrawn and, not engaging in a normal kind of way. We talk about what are some effective responses. So mindfulness is an evidence-based practice that can reduce the impact of trauma. Restorative practices. So we think about, instead of like, if I'm the director of a rec center and you are, you, Nelson, come in and you're having a bad day and something terrible happened to you, and so you're being really difficult, instead of me reacting and just kicking you out, instead, I'm going to engage you in conversation. We're going to try to figure out what happened, and then we're going to try to move forward together. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to hold you accountable for your behavior, but it does mean that we can get to a place where we're not punitive. I'm not having to assert my own authority in a way that can further re-traumatize you. So we talk about grief and loss and what that does. And what's beautiful about our training, one, it's a year long, so it's like a very deep dive for each of our city agencies. We started with our library system. And 2 is that every single trainer that we bring in is a Baltimorean. We believe fundamentally that our city has the answers, that we are the medicine, that we don't need to look to New York or Philly or DC or some other place where people are perceived to be smarter to find some magical solution. We've got it right here in the city of Baltimore. So folks like Annette March Greer from Roberta's House are on our faculty. Folks like Ali and Atman Smith from Holistic Life Foundation, the Youth Healing Alliance. Not that you should necessarily know who any of these groups are unless you're a Baltimorean, but if you are a Baltimorean, you better know who Roberta's House is, because it is the premier grief counseling center, I would say, in the United States, particularly for communities of color. So we train. The other piece, we have a task force. It's 38 people. We work together. It's physicians, returning citizens, students, educators, nonprofit people, business people. We work together to come up with strategies to dramatically reduce trauma across our city. And then finally, each of our city agencies is tasked with working with our task force to identify within their own policies and procedures, what are some ways that we, city government, have caused trauma on the people that we serve, and how can we stop doing that? And I'll give you one quick example, which is that in the library system, we used to have a zero tolerance policy for anyone that was using illegal substances. So like if you came in, let's say I'm the Penn North branch of the Enoch Pratt Free Library, and if you came into my library and you smelled like weed, or I thought you were drunk, my recourse would be to write you up and then immediately kick you out, right? What we know in the year 2022 is that substance use disorder is a disease, addiction is a mental health issue, and it is not criminality. And Baltimore was one of the ground zero places for zero tolerance and mass incarceration. And guess what? None of it worked. We just locked a bunch of people up in a jail cell and ruined lives. And, you know, we still are seeing overdose deaths that are outpace our homicide rate by almost 3 times, right? So we have a huge problem. So instead of kicking people out, what the library system decided to do is bring in peer recovery coaches. These are folks who who themselves have struggled with addiction and who are able to work with people that are addicted and may want to get into recovery. They provide Narcan, they provide counseling, support. We believe in harm reduction, so we're going to meet you wherever you are. But those folks are literally embedded in the library and they work with people. And so that's one shift in policy that we believe will have a really positive effect on our city. But that's how we see trauma-informed care, is that it's about training, it's about having a group of extremely diverse Baltimoreans that are attacking it from all different angles, and it's about policies and procedures.
Yes, this is very good. Like, I've learned so much, like listening to you and listening to all of the work that you're doing behind the scenes. And that's why I decided to make this show about public safety and youth empowerment. And even like, everybody knows like it's Black History Month this month. And just, I like to do the most to celebrate different communities, not just people who look like me, but other communities of color, and just not just from a local standpoint, but, from a national perspective. Like, so we've gone through so much, as a people, and we deserve to take advantage of all of these wraparound services that you all are providing. And that's why it's important for people to be involved in these types of conversations with the people that they elect, and also with their community members. Because like I didn't know anything about all of the stuff that you just laid out here, this evening. And it's great to know that you're doing all of this work behind the scenes, because a lot of people, they don't really know what their resources are until they actually sit down and have these conversations with, their elected officials and with members of their community. So you don't, if you don't ask and if you don't participate, you miss out on a lot. So it's great to know that you're doing this work, because it's very important. And again, a lot of people don't really understand what they have at their disposal to use, when they're going through things. And it's great to know that you exercise, you and your colleagues, you're exercising that care and compassion towards people, especially during this time, because next month will be 2 years in, the pandemic. And I often think about how many people have suffered from so much loss financially, and in different aspects. So before I let you go for the evening, so what is some advice that you would give to young people like myself who are pursuing careers in public policy, public service, I have several of my classmates who are sociology majors like me and who are pursuing careers. Some of them have internships at law firms. Some people do have internships with some people from the Maryland General Assembly and their councilmen or councilwomen in their office. So, what advice would you give to people doing the work that you're doing? Because again, a lot of people don't really understand what goes on behind the scenes. They just see what the media tells them, and a lot of people don't do their own research and do their due diligence. So, what would you say to them?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Look, I think this is a really precarious moment for our democracy in the United States. And I don't, say that lightly. Like, I really think we're kind of like, this thing could go left real quick, right? We saw in the last election, in the last presidential election, the losing candidate attempt to steal back the election. And then we saw a coup in our nation's capital and insurrection. And I'm really concerned that in this next election, probably not this one in the midterms, although there's reason to be concerned about this as well. But in 2024, I'm of the belief that folks who attempted to subvert democracy in 2020 will take another swing at it, and will be a lot more sophisticated in what they're trying to do and how they engage the Electoral College and how they bring alternate slates of electors from different state legislatures. I think we're a really fractured society right now, right? Like, you have all different media and social media. You've got very, very targeted right-wing, whether it's Fox or OAN or any of the sort of parlor and right-wing social media channels. And you have a different set of media on the left, and it's sort of, we've lost the ability to discern truth effectively. There's been a whole campaign to discredit the media. One of the interesting things I read the other day is that 67% of Republicans in Maryland believe that Donald Trump is the president and that he won the election. And that's a lot. Only 26% of Republicans in Maryland believe that Joe Biden is the rightful president, right? So, like, I think, like, our democracy is, like, not in good shape. And I am very concerned that we are headed off a cliff. And so I would say to young people that this is your moment, and that it is really, really, really important that you step up and participate, do things like you're doing right now, hold, public forums where you can engage with elected officials, participate in internships. And, this is what I would say too, is go into government, because, one of the things we've seen over the last, not just since, Donald Trump, but really since Ronald Reagan, is this whole move to discredit government as a legitimate organizing force in our country. And I think that's really dangerous. And, when I kind of came of age not that long ago, the idea of going into city government or local government or state government was, like, really unsexy. It was like, everybody was like, I want to do a nonprofit, right? Like, I think part of that is because the message that we've been told is that government is weak, ineffective. They're all liars. We got to tear it down. And I think that's incredibly dangerous. And I think we saw over the last couple of years why weakening our already fragile social safety net is a catastrophically bad idea, particularly in when we're in a pandemic. I mean, the fact that we lost 700,000 plus people in this country, which is the richest country on earth, like, we should be ashamed of ourselves. That makes no ever-loving sense, in no sane democracy in the year 2020, should we be losing hundreds of thousands of people to death from COVID-19. So all that said, go into government, like especially local government, because I'll tell you this, local government is where the rubber meets the road. Like, you cannot hide from people. You cannot, they want to see you. They want to smell you. They're going to tell you if they don't like you. Like, you gotta, this job takes like some thick skin. Something my wife reminds me a lot. When I'm having a bad day or someone's being mean to me on Facebook or Twitter, but I think the work that you're able to do, that my colleagues and I have been able to do at the local level, like, this is where we either win or lose. Cities like Baltimore, Gary, Detroit, Newark, Pittsburgh. I mean, all these Rust Belt cities, deeply segregated, lots of violence, lots of issues, not your New Yorks or your Austins or your DCs that are bougie and gentrified, but like places like Baltimore are, I think, the heart and soul of the United States of America. And if we can win here, we can win as a country. And so to me, I feel just inspired and motivated every single day to get up and do the work on behalf of people in my city who have been systematically disenfranchised and marginalized for not just decades, but centuries in this country and in this city. And to me, that's where we can really make an impact. So I would say to, young folks that are watching your show, I think there's a lot of different ways to participate, but I do think that local government is really important. And, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Absolutely. And again, thanks again for taking time out of your schedule to appear on my show. And
It's an honor. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes. So I relay a lot of the same information to a lot of my classmates and a lot of people that I speak with, because if we continue to perpetuate this kind of divisiveness that we perpetuate, amongst each other throughout our community, not just locally, but even with some examples that you gave in terms of other cities and people around the country, if we continue to perpetuate this level of divisiveness towards one another, and if we don't go back to the basic root of all of these problems, we're going to continue to find ourselves in the same predicament, year after year and election after election. So I'll be sitting in front of someone in about 10 to 15 years, or maybe even when I'm like your age, and, I'll be sitting in front of someone and I'll be having the exact same conversation if we don't go back and fix the problem now. So I really love what you said and how you conveyed that message. So thanks again for being a part of my show. I'm gonna let you go and close out the show, but thanks again for taking time out to speak to me tonight.
No, you bet. And thanks for having me on. And if I can ever be helpful, please let me know. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
Okay, thank you very much.
You got it.
Okay, so that wraps up another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I'm your host, Nelson E. Brown. I want to give you the answers. We were a little bit over time since he hopped on a little later. I gave him a couple of extra minutes to speak, but I will reveal the answers to tonight's trivia question. So the first answer is Walter Dean Myers. So he's the African-American writer of children's books and who's best known for young adult literature. So he was my first answer for you guys. And the second answer was Barbara Jordan. So, she was the inspirational figure, the second inspirational figure that I spoke about earlier in the show. So again, I hope that this reminds you all that public service is so important. Using your gifts in order to cultivate your passion and in order to make a difference in other people's lives is so important. Even in the midst of so much hate and so much divisiveness that we see in the world today, it's still important for us to use our gifts in order to help others and to make a difference for someone and for people, throughout your community. We are all in a position to do more and to be the change that we want to see. So I hope that you all have enjoyed this broadcast. Next week, we will be speaking with Mr. David Marshall. He has a organization and a YouTube show. He has a TV show, a YouTube show, and an organization called Journey to Josiah. And he's going to talk to us about adoption. So he's going to talk to us about his story, working with adoptions together. You know, they were, Miss Claire Beeman was on my show last month talking about the work that they did. But he is going to be on my show next week on Tuesday, February 15th from 6:30 to 7 p.m. to talk about his journey to adoption and his journey to Josiah, his YouTube show and his organization. And we're gonna have a fun time talking about that. And you all know that it's personal to me because I plan on, embarking on this journey the next few years. And I've been speaking to a lot of people from the adoption community, which is such an inclusive and diverse community about this. So it'll be a great show. So make an appointment to meet me back here at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, February 15th, 2022. This is Nelson E. Brown from the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome Guy Radio. Make sure you subscribe to all of our social media channels, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, you name it. And at Awesome Guy Radio, we're also available at awesomeguyradio.com. You're also free to follow me on social media at Nelson E. Brown and at Nelson Brown on all social media platforms. Thanks again, and I will see you all next week. Bye-bye.